The reality is 73% of homes at Ermineskin today are under drinking water advisories.
Tonight, the First Nations Clean Water Act continues to be discussed as Parliament resumed this week.
So there's a lot of work that's being done by the team on site, identifying everything that has to occur.
Construction of a safety berm at the Eagle Gold Mine site has begun in the Yukon, and a search for a missing 6-year-old boy in northern Manitoba. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. A 6-year-old boy from a fly-in community in northern Manitoba, Shamattawa Cree Nation, 750 kilometers north of Winnipeg, has been missing since Wednesday morning. Family and community members started searching for Johnson Redhead after he didn't show up for class after participating in the school breakfast program Wednesday morning. They were joined by the RCMP detachment in the community. Members of the Canadian Rangers who live in the community were also called in for what is being described as a large-scale search. A police service dog and 2 drones are also now in use. RCMP say a helicopter will be en route as soon as weather allows. The Native Women's Association of Canada is electing a new president this weekend. However, the organization continues to be in a state of ongoing turmoil amidst the expulsion of 3 provincial affiliates and the resignations of key members. APTN's Fraser Needham brings us the latest.
Elma Brooks has been involved with NWAC for over 30 years. She was an elder advisor for a yet-to-be-opened Resiliency Lodge in New Brunswick, but Brooks says she recently resigned from this position because of ongoing chaos at NWAC, is putting the future of the lodge in question.
But because of the bad publicity, as a result of a group of people who decided, I guess, to take over the organization and to make all these changes, I feel it was a hostile takeover.
Matilda Ramjatan is president of the Aboriginal Women's Association of Prince Edward Island. She too has resigned from NWAC's national board because she disagrees with the organization's current direction and says big changes need to take place for her to rejoin.
For me, probably no leadership, no CEO.
At issue is the abrupt departure of former CEO Lynn Grew earlier this year. Brooks and Ramjatan supported her, saying she had a financial vision for the organization. Old Grew's opponents, those now running NWAC, say she was driving it toward financial ruin. As well, NWAC expelled the provincial affiliates of Newfoundland, PEI, and Saskatchewan earlier this month. Vice President Gina Edwards says she can't go into details because of pending appeals, but said this.
And because of the seriousness of the breaches, it was in NWAC's best interest to safeguard and to not put NWAC at risk to remove those 3 PTMAs.
Interim CEO Madeleine Redfern says NWAC has had to make some tough financial decisions, including temporarily closing the Resiliency Lodge in Chelsea, Quebec. Redfern wouldn't confirm or deny allegations she is currently living at the lodge, but she did have this to say.
We don't disclose who's living anywhere because of their safety concerns, but what I can tell you is that we determined that the property did need someone residing in it to ensure that the property is properly protected from previous activities that were putting the property at risk.
NWAC will elect a new president this weekend. Carol McBride has opted not to seek re-election due to health reasons. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
As Parliament resumed this week, the First Nations Clean Water Act continues to be studied. The House of Commons Indigenous Affairs Committee heard from witnesses from 2 Cree nations. Annette Francis brings us more from Ottawa.
Ermineskin Cree Nation leadership, along with their lawyer Clayton Leonard, were the first witnesses at the early morning committee. A week ago, the community reactivated a 10-year-old lawsuit in order to push the federal government to recognize they have a human right to safe drinking water.
As Councillor Mackinac has pointed out, Ermineskin has lived over the decades with the repeated experience of various governments saying, we're going to fix this. And now, yet again, Canada is promising best efforts in the bill. The reality is 73% of homes at Ermineskin today are under drinking water advisories.
So the intent of the lawsuit is?
To make sure everyone at Ermineskin can turn on the tap and not have to worry about their drinking water anymore, and to get confirmation in a court of law that First Nations have a right to safe drinking water.
Okay.
I think if that went in the bill, then it would help move the lawsuit towards a resolution.
And that's the next question. If it's in the legislation, does the lawsuit stop? Would you drop the lawsuit if that amendment was there?
If Canada is actually willing to implement the right to safe drinking water.
Later in the meeting, Mikisew Cree Nation Chief Billy Joe Takero joined by video conference. He stated that Bill C-61 should be dropped and Canada needs to instead respect the treaties.
People have to understand where we're situated in northeastern Alberta. The people have to remember we're situated downstream from oil sands, and that's the reason why this bill might work for the rest of Canada, because we know for a fact Alberta will always have their hands in the bucket in regards to water and what they do in regards to how they what they need to develop the resources. So that's the reason why I'm saying that we are in total opposition of this bill.
The committee will resume its study of Bill C-61 next week. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Still in Ottawa, where members of Parliament wrapped up their first week back after the summer break. But before leaving for the weekend, MPs began the morning with question period. Despite continued heckling, NDP MP Rachel Blaney questioned the status of fish farms in her riding. The controversial industry remains important to some coastal First Nations, but the federal government plans to ban open net farms by 2029.
Island Power River. Communities in my riding have been waiting for the plan for open net fish farms. It was supposed to be released in June. The Liberals instead announced that they'd be announcing a plan later. The Liberals have spent years delaying on real job strategy for all of those who will be impacted. Coastal communities must not be left behind. Will the Liberals stop the delay and ensure the plan delivers necessary funds to support impacted First Nations and coastal communities?
Hear, hear. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government is committed to protecting wild Pacific salmon and will implement a ban on open net pen salmon aquaculture in British Columbia by 2029. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is working to ensure that the draft transition plan for salmon aquaculture is measured and indeed responsible. It is important to take the time necessary, Madam Speaker, to get the draft transition plan right, given its importance to British Columbians. Work on the draft transition plan is underway and will be released in the coming weeks.
To the Yukon now, where the territorial government says they've started constructing a safety berm at the Eagle Gold Mine site near the community of Mayo. The mine, previously owned by Victoria Gold, experienced a heap leach failure in June. The failure caused a landslide, resulting in cyanide being released into the surrounding environment. The mine is now in receivership. Officials say the berm will be built across the slide area and the site's access road. Once completed, it will allow construction crews to install groundwater and interception wells near the slide area. They say the focus now is finishing emergency remediation work before winter.
Things like making sure that the pipes and the pumps are all insulated, making sure that the water treatment plant has buildings around the reverse osmosis units, ensuring that we are able to convey water around the site in winter conditions. So there's a lot of work that's being done by the team on site, identifying everything that has to occur, and that's one of the primary work packages that are going on right now.
The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations is holding a round of elections on October 31st. Up for grabs are the chief and the first and third vice chief positions. Incumbent FSIN Chief Bobby Cameron and First Vice Chief David Pratt announced their intent to run today in Saskatoon. Video journalist Rachel May has more.
First Vice Chief David Pratt is hoping to be re-elected for a third term. He says the FSIN has been successful in advocating for families affected by the child welfare system, something he says will continue with him in office.
We're going to go after the provinces and territories for what they've done to our families and to our children, and make sure that they're held accountable for the treatment of our young people.
Next up, current FSIN Chief Bobby Cameron. He's served 3 terms and is now seeking a 4th. Unlike other First Nations groups, the FSIN does not limit the number of terms one can serve in office.
By now, you've all known who we are and what we're about. You know our character. You know our behavior. You know our attitude. Our heart and mind is in the right place to serve for you under the FSIN, the strongest Indian organization, the strongest treaty Indian organization in Canada.
Cameron left the event early for a funeral on Beardy's and Okimausis Cree Nation, but he stressed the importance of sober living.
Unfortunately, all of you know what we deal with on a weekly basis. Sometimes on a daily basis. We're dealing with a deadly demon every day. Alcohol, cocaine, and meth.
Before leaving, he took a moment to answer questions from media. Chief Cameron has a 1993 conviction for break-and-enter and theft. FSIN regulations prohibit candidates with fraud or theft convictions from running for office. When asked about this, Chief Cameron stated he has never hid his past in previous elections.
So this happened over 30 years ago. I submitted my documents and the credential committees will meet, I'm assuming October 1st, because that's when we leave office, October 1st, and they'll decide.
Regarding the federal audit of the FSIN, Cameron says he is unsure of anyone's status in the investigation. Next week, 3rd Vice Chief Ali Bear will announce her intent for re-election. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Coming up after the break, our Truth in Politics panel will weigh in on the first week of Parliament and the importance of Treaty 4, which turned 150 years old last week. Stick around. Welcome back. The 150th anniversary of the signing of Treaty 4 was held in Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan last week. And this week, MPs, as you've been hearing, were back at work on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. What does it all mean for Indigenous peoples? Our Truth and Politics panel weighs in on it all. Jennifer Lewitz is with Harbour Pasqua Strategies in Prince Albert, and Winnipeg Free Press columnist Negon Sinclair joined us in studio for our conversation on Thursday. Jennifer, Negon, thanks for being with us. Negon, we'll start with you here in studio. Do you think the Trudeau minority government is going to fall anytime soon?
Well, not according to what the Bloc says. The Bloc says that they're interested in a partnership and a relationship. I think the Bloc looks to see how much the NDP has been able to achieve with the Liberals, and for this very small window of time that the Liberals have left in office, and by all accounts will probably either have a leadership change or a government change, the Bloc probably wants to get some work done. So the Bloc will probably play ball with the government.
Jennifer, been a pretty wild week so far, the return to Parliament here. Do you think, though, that we're going to be seeing an election anytime soon?
It's hard to say. I think the Liberals at this point will do pretty much anything to avoid that. We saw Jagmeet Singh say that he ripped up the deal, which I don't think anybody really knows what that means, because he said the deal is done, but as of today, he went on record to say the deal is very much not done. However, at this point, he's just not getting anything in exchange for keeping the Liberals in power. The Bloc, however, this will be really interesting to see because, the Bloc leader has went on record today to say that he's there to serve Quebecers. So what is that going to look like for Canadians across the country to know that essentially the Liberal government is being propped up by a party that cares about one province and one province only? At this point, it kind of just feels like we're patching up the Titanic until the inevitable end.
Right. Negon, while we patch up, there are a few pieces of legislation still going through Parliament, like Bill C-61, the First Nations Clean Water Act. Do you think that some of this stuff is going to get passed?
Oh, I think that for sure. I think it's just too much on the agenda of the NDP to try to get a record going into the federal election. You can already see the NDP coming out to Canadians and saying, here's our record. And one of the big problems, of course, is that the Liberals really inhabit most of the space of what the NDP historically has done on Indigenous issues. And so what the NDP certainly wants to do is get a win, several series of wins, and be able to claim that they've advocated for Indigenous communities. So undoubtedly they will encourage the Liberals to pass that water legislation and do it before the end of Parliament.
And Jennifer, those are just a couple things. I mean, it's the $47 billion child welfare reform. There's a lot of stuff out there still. With everyone, saying they're going to go to the polls, they're going to continue to threaten to go to the polls. Are you expecting anything concrete to come out of this session?
I don't think I'm expecting to see anything more concrete in terms of promises. I really was hoping to see that out of Jagmeet Singh and the NDP at the beginning of this confidence and supply deal. I think there was a real opportunity to highlight reconciliation efforts and to move them forward. We look at the TRC calls to action, and last year there were 0 completed. So at the end of the day, Indigenous issues seem to be last priority for pretty much everybody. And even in the context of a minority government and the potential of an election coming, although there's some big issues on the table right now, at the end of the day, I don't have a lot of hope that that'll even be taken into consideration if an election is triggered.
We wanted to touch on something else big here this past week. Jennifer, we'll start with you because you were there. It's been 150 years since Treaty 4 was signed, handing over a large chunk of Manitoba and Saskatchewan to the Crown. You were out there. Was this reason to celebrate?
It's a really interesting situation for me, and I was actually talking to a band counselor from a nation in Treaty 4 yesterday about it almost being conflicting, because there are chiefs that are having that discussion about what was the, we know the benefit of the signing of the treaty, but at the end of the day, we're still discussing in modern context whether or not that was the best route, and do nations actually want to be a part of that treaty now? And I have a little bit of a personal tie to it. If you look at the Treaty 4 articles, you'll see the name Charles Pratt, and that was like my 4 or 5 times great grandpa, which should surprise nobody that I descended from somebody that was involved at the end of the day, given how outspoken and opinionated I could be. But it's interesting because you think, wow, it's been 150 years, and where are we today? And is the spirit and intent of treaty still being honored? And, you know, you go to these celebrations and you hear the speeches, you see the chiefs, and you can't help but feel the advocacy in the room. But then we leave and modern life just continues and the advocacy still continues.
Well, Yukon, speaking of modern days, you know, there's a lot going on with treaty lately when it comes to annuity payments, things like cows and plows. What do you think the significance is of Treaty 4 today, 150 years later?
Well, I just certainly echo what Jennifer was saying in terms of outstanding claims and related to treaty. We are in the first wave, meaning about a year and a half, the very first wave of the impacts of Bill C-15, which is bringing Canadian law in concert with Indigenous rights. And what does that mean? That means that for the very first time in history, we are seeing provinces, BC and Manitoba in particular, but we're also seeing federal departments having to commit to Indigenous rights. I was just training a series of judges in Manitoba recently who have never been trained on Indigenous rights. Most of them have no idea what it means or the impact that it involves. And so for the first time are including that in things like criminal trials or in property trials. So what does that mean? That means that we're seeing First Nations for the first time with their outstanding treaty claims, having those embodied or embedded within negotiations with the federal government. That's where cows and plows comes in. That's where the raise of the annuities are the issues that, you know, $5 just don't gonna cut it anymore. We're talking about back in 1871, $5 a year's annuity. What does that look like today? Well, that involves billions of dollars that are owed to First Nations because simply we have rights over the land, and for the very first time in history, Canadian law must recognize that right. Just never mind all the other things with child welfare, with all the other things involving Indigenous language rights and so on. I mean, all of those things are now on the table, and you can't turn it back even if there is a change in government and a change in leadership at the federal level.
Bringing it full circle there, that was a lot to cram into 1 week's panel. Niga and Jennifer, thanks to you both.
Yeah, thanks.
The Canadian Museum for Human Rights is gearing up for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. More on that coming up after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And this one, another wild animal submission sent in to us by Miles McLeod, who snapped this picture of a black bear while on his way to the Paw, Manitoba. Great picture. Keep them coming. If you have any pictures you want to see on APTN National News, email them to us at share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, cloudy and 20 in Halifax and Fredericton. 17 in Kuujjuaq, 6 with showers in Nain. 25 in Montreal and Val-d'Or, 24 in Chibougamau. 26 with showers in Sault Ste. Marie, 21 and rain in North Bay. Rain and 23 in Thunder Bay, 21 with showers in Sioux Lookout. 13 and rain in God's Lake, 12 with showers in Norway House. 15 with rain in Winnipeg, Gimli, and Dauphin. 16 in Regina, 17 in Saskatoon. 16 for Meadow Lake and La Ronge, 14 in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, 14 with showers in Fort Chip, 17 in Grand Prairie. 17 in Edmonton, 19 in Lethbridge. 18 in Vancouver, 22 in Kamloops. Rain and 16 in Prince George, 15 with showers in Smithers. 7 in Old Crow and Whitehorse, where rain is expected. Sun's out in 11 in Yellowknife, 12 in Norman Wells. Plus 3 with snow in Sax Harbor, 5 in Paulatuck. 10 with rain in Chesterfield, 8 in Whale Cove. 2 in Resolute, 9 in Arctic Bay. The National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is a little more than a week from now. APTN, of course, will have extensive coverage on September 30th and in the days ahead of Orange Shirt Day. Here's a preview from TR Wheatley about the Truth and Reconciliation Witness Blanket being welcomed home to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights.
This West Coast artist created this witness blanket in 2014.
Carrie Newman, my traditional name is Hayalt Kingame.
A decade later, his work now given a permanent home in this National Museum.
Residential school history deserves a place amongst all of those stories, placing it in the international conversation around human rights.
Ceremony wasn't always accepted inside these walls. Neither was the word genocide until 2019, causing many protests over the years.
A little over 10 years ago that I crashed a focus group for the development of the museum.
A reflection from the institution and the lessons learned along the way.
So part of our growth really has been to understand our own connection, our own relationship with land.
Coming up during National Truth and Reconciliation Week here on APTN National News.
Looking forward to that. Thanks, TR. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. That's where you'll find our episode of Face to Face with Carrie Newman at the Human Rights Museum and much more. Stick around. Nouvelle Nationale is up next. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Have a great night. We're going to leave you with our editor, Wilfred Moore, the wizard, Scorsese's Drive to Work. Have a good weekend.